Ethan Parker never imagined that money could shrink a life so quietly. It didn't arrive like a storm or a sudden disaster. It came in small humiliations. Overdue notices slipped under his door, missed calls from unknown numbers, the landlord's polite emails that grew colder with each reminder. At 28, Ethan felt older than he should have, worn down by a city that rewarded stability and punished hesitation that he had lost his job 3 months earlier. Company restructuring, they had called it, a phrase so clean it barely sounded real. The severance barely covered a month's rent, and the interviews that followed ended the same way, encouraging smiles, promises to stay in touch, and silence. Ethan stopped telling his parents how bad things were. Pride was the last thing he owned outright, and he guarded it carefully. The only person who knew the truth was Lucas Reed. Lucas had been Ethan's friend since college, back when everything felt possible and debt was just a word adults worried about. Lucas was the kind of man who moved through rooms with confidence, as if the world had already agreed to make space for him. He worked in marketing, dressed well without trying, and always seemed a step ahead. Most importantly, he listened. When Ethan talked, Lucas paid attention, not out of politeness but genuine interest. They met one evening at Lucas's apartment, a clean, carefully arranged place that reflected its owner's control over his life. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, holding a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. Lucas leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, watching him with quiet concern. "You don't have to pretend with me," Lucas said gently. "You look exhausted." That was all it took. Ethan told him everything: the eviction notice, the interviews, the way anxiety settled into his chest every morning before he even opened his eyes. He expected advice or sympathy. What he didn't expect was the silence that followed. Lucas didn't rush to fill it. His expression shifted, thoughtful and conflicted, as if he were weighing something heavier than Ethan's words. Ethan noticed it and felt a strange unease creep in. "I can help," Lucas finally said. "I just need to be honest with you first." Ethan looked up, hope flickering despite himself. "I'm not asking for charity," he said quickly. "I just needed someone to hear me." "I know," Lucas replied. "And I'm not offering charity." Lucas mentioned Daniel then, his partner of 2 years. Ethan knew about Daniel in broad strokes. He was kind, supportive, dependable. The kind of man people settled down with. Lucas spoke of him respectfully, but there was a distance in his voice, as if he were describing something carefully preserved rather than actively lived. "I get lonely," Lucas admitted. "More than I should." The confession surprised Ethan. Lucas had always seemed untouchable, someone who had figured things out early. Seeing a crack in that image made Ethan feel closer to him, and also uneasy. Loneliness was a dangerous thing to share. Lucas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There's a way I could help you financially," he said. "But it wouldn't be simple." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Lucas said slowly, "I'd expect honesty. Discretion. And time." The words hung between them, carefully chosen yet deliberately vague. Ethan searched Lucas's face for clarity and found only sincerity mixed with something harder to name. Desire, perhaps. Or need. Ethan stood to leave shortly after, claiming he needed air. Lucas didn't stop him. At the door, Lucas touched his arm, not gripping, not insisting, just enough to be felt. "Think about it," Lucas said. "No pressure." The walk home felt longer than usual. Ethan replayed the conversation again and again, dissecting every pause, every look. He told himself he was overthinking it. Lucas was his friend. Friends helped each other. Yet something about the offer felt like a line drawn faintly across the ground, daring him to step over his apartment. The silence was oppressive. Ethan opened his laptop, stared at rejection emails, then closed it again. His phone buzzed. A message from Lucas: "If you're serious about needing help, come over tomorrow. We should talk." Ethan set the phone down, heart pounding. He knew that whatever that conversation would bring, it would not be easy. But as he looked around his nearly empty apartment, desperation answered before reason could. and for the first time, Ethan considered saying yes. Ethan did not sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, Lucas's voice returned, calm, careful, dangerously reassuring. By morning, exhaustion dulled Ethan's instincts, and desperation sharpened everything else. When he stood outside Lucas Reed's apartment again, he told himself he was there to listen, nothing more. Lucas opened the door as if he had been waiting behind it. He looked composed, but his eyes betrayed him. They moved over Ethan's face with concern, then lingered longer than necessary. "Come in," Lucas said. They sat across from each other, the same distance as before, though it felt smaller now. Lucas spoke first, choosing his words with precision. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said. "Especially Daniel. But I can't ignore how empty things feel anymore." Ethan nodded, unsure what response was expected of him. Lucas continued, explaining that his relationship had grown quiet, predictable, safe in ways that no longer felt alive. He didn't frame it as dissatisfaction, only absence, an emotional gap he had been trying to ignore. "And you," Lucas said softly, "you make me feel seen." The admission landed heavier than Ethan expected. He wanted to protest, to remind Lucas of boundaries, of Daniel. Instead, he listened. Listening had always been easier than deciding. Lucas didn't mention money right away. When he did, it felt almost secondary, woven into the conversation as if it were a natural extension of concern. "I can help you stay afloat," Lucas said. "Rent, bills. No strings that would make you uncomfortable." Ethan laughed under his breath. "That sounds like strings already." Lucas met his gaze. "Only honesty. And time. I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give." That was the problem. Ethan didn't know what he wanted anymore. Fear and relief tangled inside him, making it hard to separate consent from survival. He agreed to let Lucas help, for now. He told himself it was temporary. The money arrived that week. Quietly. Efficiently. Enough to cover rent and ease the immediate panic. Ethan told himself it was a loan, even though they never used the word. With each payment, his chest loosened, and with each breath of relief came a deeper knot of guilt. They began meeting more often. Coffee after work. Long walks at night. Conversations that drifted into places Ethan rarely let anyone see. Lucas listened the way he always had, but now there was an intensity to it, a hunger that mirrored Ethan's own need to be understood. Daniel became a presence without appearing. His name surfaced in passing, plans postponed, calls unanswered. Ethan noticed how Lucas avoided mentioning him unless necessary. When Daniel did come up, it was with affection laced with distance, as if Lucas were already saying goodbye in fragments. Ethan knew he should step back. Instead, he leaned in. The line between friendship and something else blurred quietly. There was no single moment Ethan could point to and say, "That's when it became wrong." It happened in glances held too long, in silences that felt charged rather than empty, in the way Lucas's messages became the first thing Ethan checked each morning. "You're good for me," Lucas said one night, voice low. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." Ethan didn't ask what this meant. Part of him was afraid of the answer. Another part already knew. The secrecy weighed on him. Every time Lucas's phone lit up with Daniel's name, Ethan felt complicit. He told himself he wasn't forcing anyone to choose. He was just there. But being there had consequences. One evening, Lucas canceled plans abruptly. His voice on the phone sounded strained. "Daniel's been asking questions," he said. "He feels something's off." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Maybe we should stop," he said, though the words lacked conviction. Lucas was quiet for a moment. "I don't want to," he admitted. "Not yet." That honesty frightened Ethan more than any lie could have. He realized then that what they were doing wasn't harmless. It wasn't temporary. It was a slow betrayal unfolding in plain sight. The next day, Ethan received a message from an unknown number. "This is Daniel. We need to talk." Ethan stared at the screen, the weight of every choice pressing down on him at once. The secret he had convinced himself he could manage was no longer his alone, and he knew that whatever came next would demand more than silence. Ethan agreed to meet Daniel the following afternoon. The cafe Daniel chose was quiet, deliberately neutral, a place where voices stayed low and emotions had nowhere to hide. When Ethan arrived, Daniel was already seated, hands folded around a cooling cup of coffee. He looked calmer than Ethan felt, which somehow made everything worse. "Thank you for coming," Daniel said. His voice was steady, not accusatory. "I didn't want to guess anymore." Ethan sat across from him, forcing himself to meet Daniel's eyes. They were tired, but clear. This wasn't anger looking back at him. It was disappointment, heavier and harder to escape. "I know something's been happening between you and Lucas," Daniel continued. "I just need to hear it plainly." The simplicity of the request stripped away every excuse Ethan had prepared. He told the truth, not defensively, not dramatically. He spoke of losing his job, of desperation, of Lucas's offer. He admitted that what began as help had become emotional intimacy, and that he had let it continue long after he knew it was wrong. Daniel listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, silence settled between them, final and complete. "I wish you'd said no," Daniel said quietly. "But I wish Lucas had told me the truth more." Ethan swallowed. "So do I." They didn't linger. There was nothing left to clarify. When Ethan left the cafe, the relief he expected didn't come. Instead, he felt hollow, as if confession had emptied him without filling anything back in. Lucas called that evening. Ethan answered, though every instinct told him not to. "It's over," Lucas said before Ethan could speak. "Daniel knows everything." Ethan closed his eyes. "I met him today." Lucas exhaled sharply. "He's leaving." "I don't blame him." The words carried weight, but not surprise. This was always the ending, Ethan realized. They had just delayed it. "I can't do this anymore," Ethan said. His voice was firm, steadier than he felt. "Not with you. Not like this." Lucas was silent, then softer than Ethan had ever heard him. "I never meant to hurt you." "I know," Ethan replied. "But we both knew it would hurt someone." They ended the call without promises to stay in touch. Some connections weren't meant to survive honesty. The next morning, Ethan transferred the remaining money back to Lucas. It left his account nearly empty again, but the act felt necessary. Keeping it would have meant continuing the lie, and Ethan was done with that. The weeks that followed were difficult. The financial pressure returned, sharp and unforgiving. Ethan took temporary work, accepted help he once would have refused, and learned the quiet discipline of starting over. The shame lingered, but it no longer controlled him. He thought often about Daniel, about the grace he had shown in confrontation, about the cost of being truthful too late. He thought about Lucas too, not with resentment, but with clarity. Wanting something didn't make it right. Needing something didn't make it harmless. Time did what time always does. It softened the edges without erasing the lesson. Months later, Ethan stood in a new apartment, smaller but earned honestly. He unpacked slowly, deliberately. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, then went silent again. He didn't check it right away. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt present in his own life. Not comfortable. Not secure. But grounded. He had learned that desperation could make even good people compromise their values. That silence could wound as deeply as cruelty. And that intimacy taken at the wrong cost was never truly given. Ethan didn't regret wanting connection. He regretted choosing it without courage. As he placed the last box on the floor, he allowed himself a moment of stillness. The future remained uncertain, but it was finally his again, unborrowed, unhidden, and honest, and this time, that was enough. Time did not rush to smooth things over. Instead, it moved with deliberate patience, forcing me to sit with what had happened rather than escape it. In the weeks after my conversation with Daniel, I noticed how carefully I began arranging my days, as if structure could prevent memory from intruding. Work filled my mornings, long walks filled my evenings, and silence occupied the spaces in between. Mark remained unchanged, or at least he appeared to be. He called occasionally, asked how I was doing, talked about ordinary things, errands, repairs, plans that extended comfortably into the future. Each conversation reminded me how fragile trust could be, how easily it could be damaged without anyone realizing it had been tested. I listened more than I spoke, grateful and uneasy at the same time. Daniel faded from my daily life, though not from my thoughts. We didn't meet again, and our contact dwindled to nothing. It felt intentional on both sides, a quiet agreement to let distance do the work we could not. I wondered often how he was managing, whether he had followed through on the resolve he voiced in that cafe. But wondering was all I allowed myself. Reaching out would have reopened something better left undisturbed. What surprised me most was how the experience sharpened my understanding of myself. I had always believed that knowing who I was meant knowing who I loved, what I wanted, and what I would never accept. The camping trip challenged that certainty. It showed me how easily loneliness could disguise itself as connection, and how validation could feel like intimacy even when it wasn't earned honestly. One evening, while sorting through old photos on my phone, I came across pictures from the trip. Trees silhouetted against a gray sky. A fire reduced to glowing embers. No faces. No evidence of the tension that had lived just outside the frame. I stared at them longer than I expected, then deleted them all, not out of anger, but out of recognition. Some memories serve better as lessons than keepsakes. Months passed. Life expanded again, slowly but steadily. I met new people, formed connections that were uncomplicated and open. Each interaction felt cleaner, unburdened by secrecy. I found myself more willing to speak up when something felt uncertain, less inclined to linger in gray areas that offered comfort without clarity. Still, the story stayed with me, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder. It taught me that boundaries are rarely tested by obvious danger. More often, they are challenged by familiarity, kindness, and the illusion of mutual understanding. The most difficult choices, I learned, are the ones that don't feel wrong until much later. The last time I saw Daniel was at a distance, at a gathering I attended briefly before leaving early. Our eyes met across the room, and in that brief moment, there was recognition without invitation. He nodded once, respectfully. I returned the gesture, grateful for the simplicity of it. No words were needed. What had passed between us belonged firmly in the past. As I walked away that night, I felt something close to peace. Not because everything had been resolved perfectly, but because I had chosen not to let a moment define me beyond its lesson. Growth, I realized, often comes quietly, disguised as restraint rather than action. Looking forward, I carry that awareness with me. I am more cautious now, but also more confident in my ability to step back when necessary. The memory of that tent, that trip, that almost choice remains, but it no longer pulls at me. It stands behind me, a marker of where I learned to choose integrity over impulse, and though the story ends here, the understanding it gave me continues, shaping the way I move through the world, steadier, clearer, and far more honest than before.